Hello, everybody, and welcome to From Poverty to Progress, the channel that promotes an awareness and understanding of human material progress. My name is Michael Magoon. I am the author of the From Poverty to Progress book series. The first book in my book series is entitled From Poverty to Progress, and it explains the origin and causes of modern progress. My second book, which I am happy to announce is now available on pre-release, is called Promoting Progress, a radical new agenda to create abundance for all. I take the lessons learned from the theories in the first book and apply a concrete progress-based reform agenda to promote widely shared economic growth for all. Today, I'm going to talk about college admissions. Just last week, a very important ruling coming down from the United States Supreme Court about this issue in the case of Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard, and another case versus the University of North Carolina. The Supreme Court ruled that using race as a criteria for college admissions violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which was established to ensure former slaves had equal rights, and also Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That act was designed to eliminate racial segregation in the South. Now, at this point, it's a little bit unclear exactly what the impact of this ruling is to be, but I think it could have historic consequences, not just on college admissions, but for American institutions in general. I believe that to promote progress, we need a radical reform of the college admissions process, and this ruling might be a start for that. The four-year college degree has become the de facto admission ticket into the American professional class. This class dominates virtually all American institutions and supplies virtually all of our leaders. We need to ensure that those who get into universities do so based on merit. Universities benefit financially from being the de facto gatekeeper of the American professional class. Parents in that class will do almost anything to ensure that their children get into the right college. Many will pay almost any level of tuition to ensure the financial future of their children. This gives universities tremendous power to shape the behavior and beliefs of the future leaders of our nation. Since virtually all of our leaders come from that professional class, society has a real stake in who is accepted into universities. And since state and federal governments pay for a substantial portion of the higher education budget, they both have a significant amount of influence over the process. We need universities to fully embrace an admissions process that is solely based on academic merit. In this way, we can build a merit-based pathway into the professional class that is open to all. Unfortunately, discrimination is rampant in the college admissions process. Now, when most people think about discrimination in college admissions, they think about affirmative action and discrimination based on race. But that's actually one small portion of it. And I hope that we can change the debate on college admissions beyond affirmative actions to totally deconstruct our current system to make it based on academic merit. Now, in fact, the college admissions process in the United States is very complex. It's supposed to be about academic merit. It's marketed as based on academic merit, but universities, particularly private universities, routinely accept students with far lower academic qualifications, and most of those exemptions benefit the children not of racial minorities who have been discriminated against, but of the children of well-connected white professionals. Let me give you an example. And of course, admissions process varies greatly from university to university. It particularly differs between private and public schools. But here are some commonly used reasons for admitting students other than academic merit. First of all, the income of their parents is very important, particularly for private universities, i.e., their ability to pay the tuition without financial aid. Many students are allowed into universities because their parents donated large amounts of money to the college. Other students because their parents previously attended the same college. These are what's called legacy students. or their parents work for the college, or their parents have a personal connection to college administrators, what's often called the dean's list, or they're admitted in primarily due to their athletic ability, or because students participated in a large number of extracurricular activities or volunteer work, or because they got letters of recommendation from the alumni, administrators, guidance counselors, or teachers. They wrote essays, which is very common, particularly for private universities, or because of face-to-face candidate interviews. All of these additional criteria enable universities to allow students of lower academic abilities into universities while pretending that they're not doing it. This complex and opaque admissions process started in the 1920s at Harvard University. So I think it's interesting that it all may come crashing down in a court ruling that involves Harvard University. Now, up until quite recently, how college admissions actually worked was a closely guarded secret by the universities themselves. But to a large extent, because of this court case and others, we now have a window to see much better how the college admission process actually works. What we now know is that students admitted into Harvard who are recruited as athletes, legacy students, those on the dean's list, or the children of faculty, and which are called ALDCs in the lingo, have much lower academic standards than other students admitted into Harvard. According to one study, 3/4 of the white ALDC students would have been rejected if admissions had been strictly based on academic merit. Now, we typically think that recruiting athletes helps blacks because blacks are highly overrepresented in both football and basketball. But if you look at athletics overall, it's dominated by members of the children of the white working class. Recruited athletes had a 14 times higher rate of admission than non-athletes with comparable academic accomplishments, and they made up 10% of the admitted class in Harvard. Legacy students, in other words, the children of graduates of Harvard, had 5.7 times higher rate of admission, and they made up 14% of the class. Children of faculty and staff also had similar rates. All three of these groups were over 68% white, and they had higher incomes than the average applicants. So you might ask, why on earth is this process so complicated? This process, by the way, is euphemistically called the holistic process. The entire goal of this process is to obscure the fact that the process is not based on merit, while enabling college administrators to claim that it is. They can claim that admissions are primarily based on your grade point average from high school and your test scores, when in fact, there are many other factors that enable administrators to fudge on it. This entire holistic admissions process was deliberately invented to discriminate. The holistic admission process was invented in the 1920s by Harvard University itself. Now, I think it's quite ironic that this whole process might come crashing down because of a court ruling against Harvard University. Before that time, Harvard students were dominated by the Protestant upper class from the Northeast, particularly New England and New York City. Admissions were not really based on academic merit. Essentially, if you had the right family ties, you were in, and if you didn't, you were likely out. That worked really well for Harvard because they got the kind of people that they wanted. But then, starting in the 1920s, an entirely new group of students started applying for Harvard. These were the children of Jewish immigrants who settled largely in New York City. And with the incredible stress that the Jewish immigrants placed on education as a means of advancement, Jewish students started getting admitted more and more into Harvard University. By 1925, the percentage of Jewish students at Harvard had jumped from near zero to 27%. Anti-Semitism among the upper-class Protestants of New England was very widespread. So Harvard had a serious public relations problem. Who among their desired clientele would want to go to school surrounded by so many Jewish people? So Harvard President A. Lawrence Howell began a campaign to change the admission process to get the desired result. This started a long tradition of doing the same in the American admissions process. Private letters written at the time between President Howe and alumni and administrators made it clear of what the original purpose of the system was. To 1, limit the number of Jewish students to a level that was acceptable to its traditional upper-class Protestant students and alumni. Otherwise, those members of the preferred class would enroll in other elite colleges. 2, create a system so complex and opaque that Harvard could plausibly deny that deliberate discrimination was taking place. The reform worked. Within a year, Jewish enrollment was cut in half, and it remained at that level for the next few decades. All the new requirements, character requirements, photos, essays, letters of recommendation, demographic information, interviews, legacy preferences, and the ability to pay tuition enabled Harvard University to filter out undesirable Jews while claiming that they're not doing so. Thankfully, few, if any, universities today are trying to exclude Jews. But are things really so different? Now college administrators preach diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they deliberately promote that ideology in order to undermine the moral legitimacy of academic merit. And they continue the old holistic admissions process as a way of deliberately obscuring that the process is not based on merit, while in public they can pretend that it is. When the focus shifts to a less prestigious private university, the discrimination shifts more to the ability to pay tuition. With the exception of elite schools, private universities routinely accept below average students from high-income families. In order to make room for those more profitable students, universities must turn away talented students. One of the biggest problems in American higher university is the extraordinary levels of inflation in college tuition. Quite frankly, college tuition, particularly in private, but also in public schools, is becoming unaffordable for the vast majority of Americans. These higher tuitions have forced many private universities to prioritize the ability to pay over academic merit. Moreover, the best colleges' rankings reward colleges for spending lots of money. Now, most people think that student financial aid is for low-income students and that upper-income students don't get much. But the dirty little secret of private schools is that they give a substantial percentage of financial aid to students from wealthy families. They do so not because the students need the assistance, but because their research shows that the practice increases the chances that students whose parents can afford to pay their exorbitant tuition fees will choose their school. So really what it is, it's a rebate to entice people to buy the product. Unfortunately, this leaves far fewer resources for students who actually need financial aid. So now each one of these admissions criteria has a certain logic to them. But when applied together, they lead us to a deeply corrupt admissions process. Universities can pretend that they are searching for the best young academic minds and only making exceptions for the talented poor, when in fact the entire system achieves the opposite. The problem for college administrators who say they believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion cannot accept an admissions process based on academic merit because it would admit far too many Asians, it would admit too few Blacks and Hispanics, it would undermine the ability of their students to keep paying their exorbitant tuition prices, and most importantly, it would undermine their public relations because they're not promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Behind the scenes, the process is: don't admit too many Asian students. Admit a reasonable number of Black students to give the illusion of diversity and inclusion, and admit a very sizable number of students with lower academic qualifications whose parents are wealthy enough to pay the exorbitant tuitions. And most importantly, create a system so complex and opaque that the university can plausibly deny that deliberate discrimination is taking place. All of this college information's process is kept very secret, and it's only because of court cases that we have a window into how it actually works. But it doesn't have to be this way. There is an alternative: merit. So now, let me define what I mean by merit, because some people confuse it with people having value. Merit is about having demonstrated an ability or an accomplishment that is related to the decision at hand, typically hiring, firing, and promotion. Merit is using a person's past results in a specific field to attempt to predict the likelihood that they will show similar results in the field at hand. So it doesn't mean that a person's better. It just means they're better at doing a specific task. Now, specifically for universities, the focus should be on academic merit. I believe the U.S. Congress should pass legislation that public universities and private universities that accept government funding, whether in the form of financial aid or in research grants, should be required to admit students based purely on clear academic achievement. They should only be allowed to follow the following criteria for admissions. 1, high school or post-secondary grade point average, which is closely related to academic success, and test scores. For example, the SAT, SAT subjects, ACT, and many others. Now, I think they should be able to add in other academic merits, but they need to show that those metrics are clearly correlated with success in college as measured by GPA and graduation rates. These additional metrics should only be applied if they increase the accuracy of predictions of college success for the first two criteria listed above. Essentially, boiled down to something simple, they should be using grade point average plus test scores. These two factors put together are the best predictors of college grade point average and graduation rates. I also believe that universities should require anonymity. In other words, there should be a unique ID. The admission packet itself may not include the name, photo, address, or any other information that potentially identifies a person's demographic characteristics. Why? Because universities will use that information to cheat for the kind of students that they want. This will ensure that the admissions are made exclusively based on legal characteristics. I also believe that the system should be fully transparent. I believe universities should be required to show the cutoffs for GPAs and test scores for each year on the internet and publish a simple calculator that enables anyone to enter in a combination of GPA and test scores to see what the results should be. This lets everybody know what the rules are and that they can see that the rules are being applied fairly to themselves and everyone else. I believe universities should be required to publish anonymous online database listing all students who applied, including their GPA, their test scores, demographic characteristics, and the admissions results. Then anyone who is treated unfairly has the data to back up their case of discrimination in a court of law. We need to essentially force universities to make a choice. Either make their admissions based on academic merit or lose government funding. Now, I do believe that there are some reasonable exemptions that universities can or even should use. For example, requiring citizenship or that a student has a visa if they're a foreign student. It seems reasonable to me that they can limit the pool of students to their local city, their metro area, their state, or their region. Historically, Black colleges, for example, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be able to restrict their admissions exclusively to Blacks. Or that historically religious colleges, say for example, Brigham Young may restrict admissions to those of their faith, or historically women's colleges may restrict admission to women. As long as these are outlier cases and it doesn't permeate the entire system, I don't see any problem with that. But overall, the system needs to be based on academic merit. And it's also perfectly reasonable for colleges to say anyone who applies gets in. In fact, a lot of colleges actually do that. That's fine. We need to shift the overall college admissions process towards academic merit to ensure that all people have an equal chance of getting into leadership positions in our society, and we all have confidence that our leaders get in there based on merit. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please don't forget to subscribe and like. It really helps the channel to grow. If you'd like more resources, I'd recommend going to my website, FromPovertyToProgress.com. With a free email subscription, you get free ebook samples, free audio samples, and you can buy discounted ebooks and audiobooks. If you insist on paying full price, you can get ebooks, paperbacks, and hardcovers at Amazon, or if you're a bookstore or a library, you can get them at Ingram Spark. Audiobooks are available at Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. If you'd like to know more about books related to this content, I'd recommend going to my other website, which is the techratchet.com. It consists of an online library of over 280 book summaries on the topics of technology, history, economic growth, and progress.